To access the Health Information Exchange, use the username and password that you created during the provisioning or sign-up process. Once signed in, click the Optum Data Exchange tile. If the patient has not consented to the HIE, this message may appear. If you do receive this notice but have received consent from the patient, you may select the link to Manage Consent Preferences. Click the Consent tab in the upper right corner. This opens the patient search page. Once the patient has been located, click the patient's last name, which appears as a link to be directed to their consent preference on file. If consent has already been entered, further action is not required. If a consent preference has not been set, or if it needs to be updated, begin by clicking Add Consent Preference. Select the PHI, the Protected Health Information Access, from the drop-down menu. This is the consent preference indicated by the patient. This choice should reflect the consent preference given on the consent form. It is very important to select all organizations. HealtHIE Nevada consent applies to all participating organizations. Enter the date the patient signed the HIE consent form. Next, indicate the location at which the patient gave consent. This will likely be your organization. Please notice that the drop-down menu is not in alphabetical order. Type in the first 3 letters of your organization to quickly make your selection. Consent forms do not have an expiration date. Please leave these 2 fields blank. Check the box to indicate that authorization to select or update the patient's consent preference has been received. To modify the patient's consent preference, select Save. Consent to this patient's record has now been granted. Treating providers have access anytime needed for medical treatment. It is important that your organization keeps the consent form with a patient's records. Consent forms may be stored electronically in your EHR or as a hard copy. It is up to your office to decide how consent forms will be stored. The HIE does not need the signed consent form to be returned. However, in the event of an audit, the consent form needs to be on file. To enter additional consent preferences, select Return to List. Select Clear to begin the process again.